You ever have a moment where your entire life just implodes, where everything you thought was solid turns to dust right in front of you? Yeah, that was me at 22, standing in my parents' living room while they looked at me like I was the worst kind of monster. But let's back up. You need to know how I got there. I grew up in what looked like the perfect family from the outside. Suburban house, summer vacations, those cheesy matching Christmas pajamas for holiday photos. My dad was a financial advisor, sharp as hell with numbers, respected by everyone. My mom, she was all about appearances, community events, PTA meetings, making sure we looked like the picture-perfect family. And then there was me, their golden boy. Good grades, star athlete, well-mannered. The kind of son parents show off at dinner parties. And then came Ellie. She was 3 when my parents adopted her, and I was 10. Mom always wanted a daughter, and Ellie fit the role perfectly: small, quiet, easy to dote on. At first, I resented her. Suddenly, I wasn't the center of attention anymore. But over time, we found a rhythm. We weren't super close, but I looked out for her. That's what big brothers do, right? By the time I hit college, I had my future mapped out. A full-ride football scholarship, a solid 3.8 GPA in business, an internship lined up at one of the top firms in the city, thanks to Dad's connections. I had everything going for me. Until the day it all came crashing down. It started with my phone blowing up. I was heading to my truck after a brutal practice when I saw the notifications. Missed calls. Dozens of texts from family and family friends. Messages like, "How could you?" and "You're disgusting." My stomach twisted. I called my dad. He answered on the first ring, his voice like ice. "Get home. Now." No explanation, no warmth. Just those 3 words before he hung up. I broke every speed limit getting home. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. Too many cars. My uncle's truck. My grandparents' sedan. As soon as I stepped out, Uncle Jim stormed toward me and yanked me by my hoodie, slamming me against my own truck. "I should break your damn neck," he snarled, his breath heavy with beer. I could have fought back easily, but I was too stunned to react. My dad's voice cut through the chaos. Inside. Now. The second I walked in, the air turned thick, suffocating. My mom sat on the couch, face streaked with tears. My dad stood like a soldier at attention, fists clenched. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, they were all there. And Ellie. She was curled up against my grandmother, sobbing. Then Mom stood, eyes burning with fury. "How could you?" Confusion knotted in my chest. How could I what? Ellie's voice was barely a whisper, shaking as she said the words that would destroy my life. "You told me no one would believe me, that you'd hurt me if I told." I blinked. My brain couldn't even process it. She was saying, I had hurt her, my own sister. I took a step back, shaking my head. No, this is insane. I never. Before I could finish, Uncle Jim lunged again, but my dad shoved him back. "Get your things," Dad said, voice stone cold, "and get the hell out." I turned to my mom, desperate. "Mom, please." She flinched like my voice physically hurt her. "You're not my son." And just like that, my entire world crumbled. Dad tossed a duffel bag at my feet. I barely had time to register the fact that my essentials had already been packed. Then he pulled out my wallet, ripping away the credit cards he co-signed, my health insurance card, everything. I reached for him, grasping at anything solid. "Dad, I didn't do this." His fist crashed into my jaw before I even saw it coming. The force sent me stumbling back, tasting blood. "Get out," he snarled, "and don't come back." The next thing I knew, I was on the front lawn, my shoulders screaming in pain. The door slammed shut behind me. The neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering. I sat there, stunned, the cold seeping into my bones. My phone buzzed again, more messages, more accusations. Not a single one in my defense. That night I slept in my truck, and for the first time in my life, I had no home, no family, and no future. I spent that first night parked behind the old football stadium, staring at my phone, text after text, missed calls. People the first thought would have my back now, calling me the worst things imaginable. "You make me sick. I hope you rot in prison. Don't ever contact me again." I didn't sleep. How could I? One second, I was a college athlete with my whole future ahead of me. The next, I was homeless, accused of something so vile I could barely wrap my head around it. My own family had tossed me out like garbage. No trial, no evidence, just Ellie's word. By morning, my jaw was swollen, my shoulder ached like hell, and I was running on nothing but adrenaline and disbelief. I tried calling my dad, straight to voicemail. My mom? Same. I texted my best friend from high school, Ryan. No answer. One by one, I went down the list of people who had been in my life for years. Nobody picked up. Finally, Ryan texted back. Just 2 words. Can't help. That one hit different. We'd been through everything together. I helped him move, drove him home drunk more times than I could count. And now, he wouldn't even hear me out. I felt sick. I had a little over $300 in my bank account. Nowhere near enough for rent, and with my parents canceling my tuition payments, my college career was dead, in the water. The scholarship only covered tuition, and without a place to stay, without food, without gas money, what was the point? So I did what I could. I drove to campus, found my coach, and told him everything. Not about the accusation, I couldn't even say the words, but I told him I had a family emergency and no place to go. Coach was old school, hard ass, but he had a good heart. He saw the state I was in, bruised jaw, exhausted, probably looking half crazed, and didn't press. He let me crash in the equipment shed for a few nights, gave me access to the gym showers. It wasn't much, but it was something. I kept trying to reach my parents. Nothing. Then, 2 weeks later, an email from the university. My tuition hadn't been paid. That was it. I was officially done. I went to the financial aid office, hoping for some kind of miracle. But without a co-signer, without any real credit history, I was screwed. The best they could offer was maybe letting me reapply for aid next semester. But I didn't have a next semester. I picked up a job working security at a bar downtown. It paid under the table, just enough for gas and the occasional fast food meal. I ate once a day, usually a $1 menu burger or whatever scraps I could get from the bar kitchen. The weight started coming off fast. My strength faded. Friends, gone. Family, dead silent. I'd walk through campus and feel people staring. Maybe it was in my head. Maybe not. I heard whispers. That's him. Don't look. Freak. One girl in my econ class sat next to me every lecture. We talked, flirted a little, even made plans to grab coffee. After the accusation, she moved seats, acted like I didn't exist. That hurt more than I expected. 4 months later, my truck broke down. Cracked engine block. Thousands to repair. That was my breaking point. I lost my job, lost my apartment, lost everything. Nowhere left to go. I ended up sleeping in the equipment shed full time. The winter was brutal. I'd wake up shivering, numb fingers struggling to zip up my old football hoodie. Showers in the gym before sunrise, hoping nobody saw me. Nights spent wondering if I'd ever get my life back. Then one night, Coach found me. It was late past midnight. I was curled up in my sleeping bag, trying to stay warm when the door creaked open. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at me. Son, what the hell happened to you? I wanted to tell him the whole damn story, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just laughed, this dry, broken sound. Life. Coach didn't say anything at first. Then he sighed, walked in, and sat down next to me on the floor. You got 2 options. Stay here, keep spiraling, let this thing break you, or you get the hell up and do something about it. I didn't respond. I got a buddy who runs a wilderness program in Colorado, takes in guys who need a second chance. You want out of this? I'll make the call. I hesitated. Leaving meant giving up on ever clearing my name. It meant accepting that my old life was gone. But what choice did I have? I was barely surviving. So I nodded. Yeah, make the call. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus to Colorado with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a pocket full of crumpled bills. It was the start of something new. I just didn't know it yet. The bus ride to Colorado felt like both an escape and a sentence. I had nothing left tying me to my old life, no home, no school, no family. The wilderness program was my last shot at something. I didn't know what. I just knew I couldn't keep living like I had been. When I arrived, I half expected some kind of boot camp, but it wasn't like that. It was remote, sure miles away from any real town. A handful of log cabins surrounded by dense forest, the kind of place where your phone was just a useless piece of plastic. The other guys were like me, men with nowhere else to go, trying to rebuild. Some had records, some were vets with PTSD, some were just lost. The work was brutal. Days started at dawn hauling firewood, building shelters, guiding rich kids who got sent there by their parents to find themselves. The pay was garbage, but they gave me a bed and 3 meals a day. After months of barely eating, that alone felt like a miracle. Physically, I started getting strong again, hiking up mountains, chopping wood, carrying 50-pound packs for miles. I put on muscle fast, but the mental weight, that didn't go away so easily. Every night, I lay in bed replaying that night my life fell apart. My dad's voice, my mom's tears, Ellie sobbing into grandma's shoulder, no one looking at me like a son or brother, just a monster. One night, I finally broke. It was late, and a few of us were sitting around a fire after a long day. One of the guys, Sam, asked me why I was there. He was an ex-Marine, tough as hell, but he never pushed. Just waited. For the first time in a year, I told someone the whole damn thing. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. I hadn't realized I was gripping my knees so hard. My knuckles were white. Sam stared at the fire for a long moment, then exhaled. That's some heavy shit. That was it. No pity, no doubt. No, are you sure you didn't? Just acknowledgement. That was the first night I slept without nightmares. The next 6 months, I threw myself into the work, became one of the lead guides, took on extra shifts, anything to stay busy. I stopped thinking about my old life, about my parents, about Ellie. Then I made the biggest mistake of my life. I started drinking. At first, it was just on weekends, kicking back with the other guys, but it escalated fast. When I wasn't working, I was drinking, blacking out, anything to numb the memories. Then came the drugs, weed first, then shrooms, then coke, whatever I could get my hands on, anything to keep from thinking. It all caught up to me one morning when I was leading a climbing expedition. I was hungover bad, dehydrated, sluggish, not thinking straight. One of the kids slipped. I should have been faster, should have reacted in time. Instead, I froze for half a second too long. He fell. He survived, but he broke his leg in 2 places. That night, the program director pulled me aside. "Jake, you're one of the best guides we've got, but you're self-destructing. I can't have you responsible for lives when you're like this." He fired me on the spot, told me to get my shit together. And just like that, I was back to nothing. I scraped together what little money I had, bought an old NT8 Honda Civic for $1, $200 cash, and started drifting. Working security at bars, construction gigs bouncing from town to town. Never staying long enough to get attached. I avoided people, avoided women. I'd literally walk out of a restaurant if a kid sat too close to my table. The idea of being accused again, of being trapped in that nightmare, it haunted me. Then one night, I got jumped. I was working security at a college bar in Fort Collins. A guy recognized me from my old school. He and his friends started whispering, throwing me looks. By closing time, they were waiting for me outside. 3 of them. Sick freak. One of them spat. "Someone should have put you down years ago." I fought back, landed a few good hits, broke one guy's nose for sure, but it was 3 against 1, and I was exhausted. They left me in the parking lot with 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a concussion. The hospital bill was $177,000. No insurance, no way to pay. They discharged me in 2 days, gave me painkillers that barely worked, and sent me on my way. I spent the next week sleeping in my car, barely able to move, washing up in gas station bathrooms, eating dollar menu burgers when I could afford them. Then, one night, I drove to a bridge outside town. It was cold, raining. I parked, climbed over the railing, and just stood there, staring down at the water. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even sad. I just felt done. Then a voice cut through the rain. "Bit cold for a swim, don't you think?" I turned. An old man stood a few feet away, wearing a rain jacket, holding a fishing pole. "Go away." My voice was hoarse. He didn't. "Can't do that, son. See, if I leave and you jump, that makes me responsible, and I ain't living with that." I wanted to tell him to screw off, but something in his voice, steady, calm, like he'd seen men at their worst before, made me pause. "Tell me why you're here." And for some reason I did. I told him everything. When I finished, he nodded. "You've been carrying this alone too long. Come inside, get warm. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." "Why would you help me?" I asked. His eyes were sharp, even in the dark. "Because I've seen men stand where you're standing, and I know that if you step back tonight, you've got a hell of a fight left in you. and I don't know why, but I climbed back over that railing. That old man, Frank, saved my life, and I had no idea how much more he was about to change it. Frank took me in that night. No questions, no judgment. Just handed me a towel, a dry hoodie, and a plate of food. I ate like I hadn't seen a real meal in years, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. His house was small, but clean. Military precision in everything. The books on the shelf were lined up perfectly. The kitchen spotless. Even his shoes by the door were placed exactly parallel. It didn't take a genius to figure out he was ex-military. He let me crash on his couch. It was the first real sleep I'd gotten in. I don't even know how long. The next morning, Frank made me breakfast eggs, bacon, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He didn't press me to talk, didn't pry, just sat across from me like we were two old friends having a normal morning. Then, after a long silence, he said, "You got a plan?" I exhaled, rubbing my aching ribs. "Not really." "Then, I got one for you." He told me he ran a small security firm. Executive protection, event security, the kind of work where you needed to be tough, discreet, and know how to handle yourself. He needed another guy on his team. "Why me?" I asked. Frank sipped his coffee. "Because a man who's been broken and still gets back up is the kind of man I trust." I had nothing to lose, so I said yes. That was the start of everything. Frank didn't just give me a job, he gave me structure. I had to be up at 5 a.m. every morning for training. Strength work, endurance, combat drills. He had me running 5 miles before breakfast, sparring in the afternoons, learning how to de-escalate situations without violence. At first, my body resisted. I was still healing from the beating, still weak from months of barely surviving. But Frank didn't accept excuses. Pain means you're alive. Keep moving. It was brutal, but I thrived on it. For the first time since everything fell apart, I had purpose. Frank didn't just teach me how to fight, he taught me discipline. Taught me how to read people, how to handle high-pressure situations, how to think 2 steps ahead. And he made me go to therapy. I resisted at first. The idea of sitting in some office, spilling my guts to a stranger? No thanks. But Frank wasn't the kind of guy you argued with. "You got your bell rung, son. Not just your body, your head. You need to fix that if you're going to build something real." He introduced me to his old buddy, Doc, a retired Marine turned therapist who specialized in PTSD cases. At first, I barely talked, just sat there, arms crossed, answering questions with one-word responses. But week after week, Doc chipped away at me, helped me unpack everything what happened with my family, the fear of being accused again, the nightmares, the anger. I started realizing that I wasn't just angry at Ellie. I was angry at myself. Angry that I didn't fight harder to prove my innocence. Angry that I let them break me. And for the first time, I let that anger go. 6 months in, I was a different man. Stronger, sharper, more in control. Frank promoted me to lead security on some high-profile jobs, tech CEOs, celebrities, politicians. I learned how to blend into the background, how to anticipate threats before they happened. Then came the night I met Sophie. Frank sent me to run security at an art gallery opening. He didn't say much about it, just that it was for his niece. I was expecting some snobby rich girl, the kind who looks through people like they don't exist. Instead, I met her. Sophie was nothing like I expected. Tall, dark hair cut in this effortless, messy way. Sharp green eyes that could cut through steel. She had this energy, smart, confident, alive. She didn't give me a second glance at first, just walked past me, completely uninterested. I was doing my job, scanning the room, when I overheard her talking to a buyer about some abstract painting. The guy wasn't getting it, and after he walked away, she muttered, "Not everyone has taste." Without thinking, I said, "Maybe it just looks like a mess." She turned, giving me a sharp look. "And you're an art critic now?" I shrugged. "Nah, but I know when something's trying too hard." For a second, I thought she'd tell me to screw off, but then she smiled. Almost. That conversation turned into another, and by the end of the night, she handed me her card. "I need a security consultation at my condo. Think you can handle that?" Total excuse. But I wasn't complaining. That consultation turned into dinner. Dinner turned into late-night conversations about everything from art to philosophy to childhood scars. She was different. She challenged me. She didn't just see the scars. I think she saw the fight in me. And for the first time in years, I let someone in. 2 years later, I proposed. Did it right down on one knee, ring in hand, heart pounding like crazy. Frank walked her down the aisle since her dad had passed years ago. We built a life, a real one. Bought a small house, built up the security firm, expanded into 3 states. Sophie's art career took off. Everything was finally right. Then, one random Tuesday, everything from my past came crashing back. I was in my office, reviewing security protocols for an upcoming job, when my assistant buzzed in. "Sir, you have a call. A woman says it's a family emergency." My first thought was Sophie, or Frank. Put her through. I picked up the phone. "This is Jake." Silence. Then a shaky breath. "Jake, it's Mom." My whole body went cold. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 years. I wanted to hang up, to tell her she was too late. But before I could, she said something that made my entire world stop. "Jake," Ellie confessed. She lied. About everything. I felt like the floor had just disappeared beneath me. 7 years. 7 years of exile, of nightmares, of clawing my way back from rock bottom. And now they wanted to talk? "Jake, are you there?" I didn't answer. Just hung up the phone, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to Frank's house. When I told him, he just nodded, like he'd been expecting this moment. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I exhaled. My hands were steady, my heart calm. I think it's time I faced them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Frank's living room, staring at the wall, trying to process what my mother had just told me. 7 years. 7 years of being hated, abandoned, and erased. And now, just like that, Ellie confessed. Frank poured us both a drink, his weathered hands steady as ever. He didn't say much, just let me sit in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Finally, he spoke. "You already know what you're gonna do." He was right. For 2 weeks, I ignored the flood of messages, calls, texts, emails. My mom, my dad, even relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Suddenly, they all had something to say. I wasn't in a rush to hear it. I talked it over with Sophie. I talked it over with my therapist. And eventually, I made my decision. I would meet them, but on my terms. I sent my mom a text. "Coffee shop on Main Street. Sunday, 2 p.m. Just you, Dad, and Ellie. One chance only." She responded instantly. "We'll be there." I stared at the message for a long time before locking my phone. Frank insisted on coming as backup. Sophie too. I didn't argue. I might not have had my old family, but I had them. Sunday came fast. I barely touched my coffee, my stomach a knot of tension. Frank sat on one side of me, quiet but watchful. Sophie gripped my hand under the table, her fingers warm against my skin. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened. They walked in. Mom, Dad, Ellie. The first thing I noticed, they looked smaller. Mom's hair had gone almost completely gray, her eyes hollowed out with stress. Dad had lost weight, his once pristine posture slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. Ellie barely looked like the girl I remembered. They spotted me and hesitated. I didn't move. Finally, they approached the table. Mom tried to hug me. I leaned back, keeping Sophie between us. "Sit." They did. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The hum of the coffee shop filled the space between us. Other people were pretending not to listen, but I could feel their stolen glances, the tension in the air. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Son, I cut him off. I'm not your son." His mouth snapped shut. I folded my hands on the table. "Say what you need to say." Mom's hands trembled as she reached for Ellie's, squeezing them tight. Dad looked away. And Ellie finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red from crying. "I lied," she whispered, "about everything." I already knew that, but hearing her say it to my face was different. "I was jealous," she admitted. "You were perfect, smart, talented. Everyone loved you. I wanted them to look at me the way they looked at you. I didn't think it would go that far." I let her words hang in the air, let her sit in the weight of them. I thought maybe they'd get mad at you, ground you or something. But then, everyone believed me, and suddenly I was the victim. I was the one they protected. I didn't know how to take it back. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you just let me lose everything?" Ellie flinched. "I was 15, and now you're 22. You had 7 years to tell the truth." She swallowed hard, looking down. I turned to my parents. "And you two? Do you have anything to say?" Dad exhaled sharply. We thought we were protecting her. You thought you were protecting her, I repeated. But you didn't think about me, your own son. Mom wiped at her tears. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and we are so sorry. I stared at her. You destroyed my life. No one spoke. Do you know what happened to me? I asked, voice flat. Do you know what 7 years of exile does to someone? They didn't answer, so I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through old photos, held it up so they could see. A picture of me after the bar fight, black eye, swollen lip, blood dried on my face. Another one, me looking emaciated in the equipment shed, bundled in 3 hoodies, bags under my eyes so dark they looked bruised. A hospital record, $177,000 in medical debt. Mom pressed a hand over her mouth. Dad turned away. Ellie was crying. Good. You threw me out like trash, I said. Took everything from me. And now that you know the truth, what? You want forgiveness? You want things to go back to the way they were? Dad's jaw tensed. We just want our family back. I shook my head, exhaling a sharp, bitter laugh. We are not a family. My family is sitting right here. I gestured to Sophie, to Frank, to the people who actually stood by me when I had nothing. Mom sobbed harder. Ellie's voice was barely above a whisper. Please, Jake. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but Mom and Dad shouldn't suffer from my mistake. I studied her for a long time. You're right. I turned to my parents. You should suffer for your own mistakes. Silence. Then finally, Mom whispered, we need your help. There it was. Dad's business had tanked. They'd lost their house, their money. Ellie had to drop out of school. And now, after years of ignoring me, after years of letting me rot, they were coming to me for help. I stood up, pulled a couple of bills from my wallet, and placed them on the table. Enough to cover their coffee. This is all you get from me. Mom reached for my arm. Please don't leave it like this. I met her eyes, my voice quiet but firm. I want you to remember how it feels to have everything taken away, to feel helpless, to have no one believe in you. Then I turned and walked out the door. Frank followed. Sophie slipped her hand into mine, squeezing tight. Proud of you, son, Frank murmured as we stepped into the street. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt free. I didn't look back as I walked out of that coffee shop. Didn't wait to see if they followed. Didn't care if they sat there crying, or if my dad finally broke down, or if Ellie curled in on herself, crushed under the weight of her own guilt. That was their burden to carry now, not mine. For years, I'd let their betrayal haunt me, let it shape me, let it strip me down to nothing. But standing there, Sophie's hand in mine, Frank at my side, I finally understood. I didn't need them. I never had. That night, Sophie and I sat on our back porch, the summer air thick with the scent of pine and the distant hum of crickets. She leaned into me, her head resting against my shoulder, tracing small circles on the back of my hand with her thumb. How do you feel? She asked softly. I thought about it. Lighter, not healed, not completely. There were still scars that would never fade, wounds that ran too deep. But for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying that weight alone. I don't regret walking away, I admitted. But I think I might reach out to Ellie one day. Sophie nodded, not judging, not pushing, just understanding. Take your time, she murmured. When you're ready. I kissed her hair. I love you, she smiled against my skin. I know. Months passed. Life moved forward. Sophie's pregnancy went smoothly. We found out we were having a boy. Frank nearly cried when I told him we were naming him James Franklin Carter James for my old coach, the man who gave me a place to sleep when I had nowhere else, and Franklin for the man who saved my life. Frank tried to act tough about it, but I caught him wiping at his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Damn kid, naming him after an old man like me, he muttered, voice thick. Not just any old man, I smirked. The best one I know. He grumbled about it, but I caught the pride in his eyes. I built a family, not the one I was born into, but the one I chose. One day, out of nowhere, I got a text from an unknown number. Ellie, I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry again, for everything. I don't expect a response. I just needed you to know. I stared at the screen for a long time. The old me, the one who let anger and bitterness rule him, would have ignored it, would have deleted the message without a second thought, but I wasn't that person anymore. I don't hate you, I finally typed. but I can't forgive you yet. Maybe one day, maybe not. That's not for you to decide. A few minutes later, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, she just sent, "I understand." And for the first time since she ripped my life apart, I believed her. Years passed. James was born healthy, strong, mine. The first time I held him, I felt something in my chest crack wide open. He was so small, so warm, his tiny fingers curling around mine like he already knew I'd protect him with everything I had. I would protect him. I'd teach him to be strong, to be kind, to stand up for himself, but never at the cost of someone else. And no matter what, I'd make damn sure he never felt the kind of betrayal I had, because I knew what it meant to be abandoned. And I would never let my son feel that pain. Frank passed away when James was 3. It hit harder than I expected. The man had been like a father to me, had given me everything when I had nothing. Losing him felt like losing another piece of my foundation. At his funeral, I stood beside Sophie, James in my arms, watching as they lowered the strongest man I'd ever known into the ground. "I hope I make you proud," I whispered. And somehow I knew I had. One day, when James was 5, he asked me why I didn't have a grandpa like his friends did. I knelt down, brushing a strand of dark hair from his face. "I did, buddy. He just wasn't the one I was born with." James tilted his head. "Like how Uncle Ryan's not my real uncle, but he is?" I smiled. "Exactly like that. So you picked him?" I nodded. "Sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you're given." He seemed to think about that for a second, then nodded like it made perfect sense. "I like that." I ruffled his hair. "Me too." Ellie never asked for anything after that text. She didn't try to force her way back into my life. She never played the victim. She just let me go at my own pace. Years later, I reached out, not for her, for me. We met at a quiet diner. She was nervous, fiddling with the ring on her finger, engaged now, with a life of her own. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel when I saw her, but the anger wasn't there anymore. She looked up at me, unsure. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Tell me about your life." Her face softened in relief, and she did. We didn't talk about the past. Not that night. Maybe not ever. But we talked about now, and that was enough. I never spoke to my parents again. I heard through the grapevine that they lost everything, that they worked retail jobs, scraping by in some cramped apartment. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel anything for them. Some wounds never heal. Some betrayals run too deep. And that's okay. I didn't need to forgive them. I had my own life, my own family, and I was finally free. For those asking, no, my parents never met James, and they never will. I made peace with the past, but that doesn't mean I forget. Some people don't get second chances, and I'm okay with that. Story 2. This narrative has a title. I removed my wife from my life when she exchanged our IVF embryo for her XZ. I'm sitting here at 3 in the morning. Since I can't sleep, I'm composing this on my phone in the hopes that some of you could get some insight from the complete mess that has become my life. A fair caution. This will take a lot of time. I'm Jack, a 32-year-old man, and until a few months ago, I believed that my life with my 31-year-old wife, Emma, was going very well. In addition to producing significant money, the property was in a decent area and was visible to everyone. We were that pair that always seemed to be in sync. You are aware of the kind. Thor, our enormous Maine Coon cat, was essentially our first child. Every night, like clockwork, a huge orange ball of fluff would lie on my chest and attack my feet at precisely 5:30 a.m. Thor was more my cat than hers, Emma used to say. She was not mistaken. After 2 years of trying to conceive, he would follow me around the house like a puppy and would sit in the bathroom sink as I got ready for work. 2 years, for crying out loud. It was thrilling at first, like, "Hey, sweetie, this could be the night." However, it simply became this ominous cloud looming over us after months of negative testing. It was the same each month. I hope. Disappointment. Quiet. Do it again. Without speaking, we simply sit there. Because, what might be said, have a better experience the next time. Yes, exactly. I recall this evening following yet another unfavorable test result. Emma just sobbed while sitting on the restroom floor. I had run out of things to say. We were caught in a never-ending cycle of disappointment. as all of our friends had children and shared their ideal family photos on Instagram. Following a battery of testing, the physicians were unable to identify any particular issues with either of us. This is just another one of those infertility instances where you can't figure out why you can't conceive since there isn't a real solution. One night, Emma proposed IVF. "It's our best chance," she remarked in a tremulous voice. I made no hesitation at all. I immediately said yes since I believed that we were on the same page. That's what marriage is meant to be, isn't it? A group. The financial blow was severe. Only a portion was covered by insurance, so we took money out of our savings. However, I reasoned that it would ultimately be worthwhile. At last, we would have our family. She took charge of the IVF procedure, claiming that I was already under a lot of stress from work and that she would take care of all the appointments. Simple, everyday tasks. If the clinic had any urgent needs, she would say they will call, and I had total faith in her. When we went in for the actual embryo transfer, I did attend a few important appointments. As the doctor went over everything with her, I was right there, holding her hand. I recall believing that this was our unique occasion, the start of our family. To commemorate the day our children's lives began, I even snapped a photo of us in the clinic room. Everything appeared to be going well in the initial months following the treatment. At last, Emma became pregnant. We began converting the extra room into a nursery when the morning sickness wasn't too awful. Over the course of a weekend, I painted everything myself. Thor continued to wander across the carpet and across the paint pan in an attempt to assist. Cleaning that up was enjoyable. We even agreed that we didn't want to know the gender, wished for a surprise. Emma had selected names for both options. We were planning, constructing a future. That's what I believed we were doing anyhow. She was having a healthy pregnancy. After 5 months, she was finally starting to show. Not only did she have a large lunch-style showing, or is she pregnant? With every week that went by, my excitement about becoming a father grew. I was prepared with a list of dad jokes and everything. One evening, I began assembling the crib, and wow, those directions might have been written in ancient Egyptian. To figure things out, I spent around 3 hours watching a YouTube instructional. Thor continued to assault the little Allen wrench while leaping inside the box. Not very helpful, friend. I was preparing at this time by doing all these tiny things. Read the pregnancy books Emma purchased and download applications that provide weekly updates on the baby's size. Now your baby is as big as an avocado. All the things that new fathers do. Then, one haphazard Tuesday evening, I was reviewing some tedious insurance documents to make sure everything was insured for the delivery. I sat at the kitchen table, with Thor purring in my lap, going through all the invoices and medical documents we had gathered, while Emma was already asleep. I noticed anything strange at that point. I didn't have the ID of the sperm donor, not my name, not my clinic patient number, some code that is entirely different. I initially believed I was simply weary and misinterpreting things. However, I verified it once more and contrasted it with my own patient number from a different form. Not a match. That was the time. My entire chest became icy. It must have been an error, I assured myself. Most likely, the clinic just made a mistake on the paperwork. This couldn't have been true, could it? Emma wouldn't after all. She was unable to. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I just laid there looking up at the ceiling, wondering whether I still recognized her. I headed directly to the IVF facility the following morning after waiting until she departed for work. I recall spending about 20 minutes waiting in the parking lot, trying to get the bravery to inside, because the first secretly believe I already knew. The receptionist gave me this strange look when I eventually stepped in, but I remained calm, extremely kind, and only asked for information. Hello, I discovered something odd when going over some documents related to my wife's medical care. Could you verify which embryo was utilized in our process? Melissa, who was identified by her name tag as the receptionist, grinned and began to type on her computer. Then I saw a shift in her expression. Little, tiny scowl, the little inclination of the head. Before she even spoke, my stomach fell. She squinted at her screen and murmured, "That's strange. It appears that a different embryo than the one originally assigned to your case was utilized." My heart was thumping in my ears. What are you saying? It appears that a donor specimen was utilized in its place. She gave me this perplexed look as she looked up. However, your signed consent ought to have been necessary for that. I tried to speak steadily as I just looked at her. I didn't ever sign anything. She took another look at the paperwork. This indicates that the update was approved by your wife. I felt chilly all over. You changed the embryos without consulting me then? Her face turned pale. That shouldn't take place. To stop that, we have policies in place. Then describe how it worked. Trying not to cry in the midst of the waiting area, I said. I was on my way out the door when she began to mumble something about obtaining a supervisor. I had to face Emma, right now. On the way home, I contacted my boss and informed him that I had a family emergency. He urged me to take whatever time I needed, without even asking any questions, so I must have sounded as confused as I felt. I was driving too quickly. I had a million ideas flying through my head. I was shivering with anger by the time I pulled into our driveway. As I inserted my key into the door, I recalled thinking that this would be the turning point in my life. Everything that came before and everything that came after. And I was correct. I closed the door behind me as I entered the home. As if I had just triggered a firecracker, Thor leaps from his window perch. He detested loud noises, poor guy. Emma was weeping while sitting on our couch, even though I thought she would be at work. She was wiping her eyes with trembling hands and a red, swollen face. When she said, "You went to the IVF center I had just entered," there was no doubt at all. I was certain that this wasn't a mix-up at that point. She was fully aware of what I had discovered. I didn't say anything. I simply stood there and stared at her. To be honest, I was terrified that I would start shouting if I spoke. Furthermore, I've never been the shouting kind. Olivia, a friend of mine, works there, she muttered. You were asking inquiries, she texted me. I heard that you were upset. My jaw clenched so tightly that it was painful. That buddy who assisted you in switching the embryos. Is that right? The entire body flinched as she took a deep breath. I only needed to see that. She was fully aware of her actions. Why? My voice sounded frigid. I didn't identify it as belonging to me. She looked away from me and rubbed her face. She once reached for my hand, but I retreated as if she were attempting to give me a snake. You wouldn't comprehend. At last, she spoke without looking directly into my eyes. All I wanted for our child was the finest. I desired robust, healthy genes. What does it mean? I utilized an anonymous donor from the clinic's database, she answered after hesitating for a while. Someone having superior genetic qualities. Better than mine. I felt like I had been hit in the belly. I chuckled, because this was more than just a betrayal, not because anything was amusing. This was just plain madness. There is no family history of cancer or heart problems for the donor. She hurried to give an explanation. He's tall, athletic, with a degree in biochemistry. All I wanted was to give our child the greatest start possible. Do you know what's wrong? My dad had a slight cardiac issue. Nothing serious. Just need medicine. She was essentially suggesting that my family's genes weren't suitable for her, and Emma was aware of this. So you simply removed me from our child's life without notifying me? And you believed you had made that choice? She got to her feet, protective arms encircling her abdomen. Jack, it's still our baby. In all that counts, you will still be the father. I fired back, except that I was the father, with the exception of the months you spent lying to me. With the exception of the point where you made this important decision without consulting me. After sneaking back into the room, Thor was sitting in the corner, observing us with wide eyes. This was horrible, even for the cat. Her voice cracked as she continued. I was trying to do what's best for our family. I thought you'd understand. I just learned about it after the baby was delivered. Emma, when did you intend to tell me? Or did you simply hope I wouldn't find out that I'd reared a stranger's child under the mistaken impression that it was mine? That was a response in and of itself, but she didn't respond. I raked my hands through my hair in an attempt to focus. And Olivia, your clinic buddy, just assisted you in committing fraud, because this is exactly that. My consent was faked by you. On medical records, you lied. Emma's gaze widened. That wasn't the case. Olivia just assisted with the documentation. You mean she didn't fabricate anything? Conveniently, she neglected to obtain my signature before replacing my sperm with that of an unknown donor. A protracted hush ensued. Emma kept opening her mouth as if she had something to say, then shutting it once again. At last, she took a seat again. Shoulders drooped. I believed I was acting appropriately. Yes, I did. I reached over to the counter and took my keys. I must leave this place. I must think. "Where are you heading?" She spoke in a little voice. "Anywhere except here," she yelled after me as I made my way to the door. "Please, Jack. This is something we can resolve. We are expecting a child." I looked back at her. "Emma, no. You are expecting a child. It seems like I'm the only one who should foot the bill." Despite Thor's objections, I took his carrier out of the closet, picked him up, and put some of his food in a bag. I was not going to abandon him. "Are you stealing the cat?" With incredulity, she inquired. "Yes, I'll take the cat. He is, at least, truly mine." I had no idea where I was headed when I left, just being aware that I couldn't be there for another minute without saying something I couldn't take back. I didn't quite feel the weight of it until I was halfway down the street. It was all a lie. All I believed I had, everything I had constructed. From his carrier in the passenger seat, Thor let out a meow. His little paws pressed against the mesh as if he was attempting to make sense of the situation. "Yes, friend. Likewise," I told him, feeling foolish for talking to my cat. "It's just you and me now, buddy." But, to be honest, he was the sole remaining member of my family at that time. I spent hours driving about with no apparent objective. Just Thor and I cruising the streets while I attempted to comprehend how my life had suddenly fallen apart. In the end, I showed up at my friend Mark's house with a cat carrier and probably looked like I had seen a ghost. I didn't even phone beforehand. What on earth was Mark saying when he answered the door, dude? After glancing at my expression, he said, "Shit, come on in." As he got us both drinks out of his refrigerator, I told him the shortened version. His response was much what one could anticipate. A whole lot of "what the fuck?" and "what did she do?" When Mark's girlfriend Jen arrived home while I was in the middle of writing, she jumped straight into crisis mode, getting Thor a makeshift litter box and organizing the spare room for me. Since I sat on their couch and stared at nothing while I let them handle everything, I believe I was still in shock. I had trouble sleeping that night. Thor purred on my breast as I lay there on their guest bed. When Emma phoned for the 8th time, I switched off my phone. I simply couldn't take any more deception. I gave my lawyer a call the next morning. I'll give her the name Vanessa. A few years ago, this fierce woman supported my brother through his divorce. I explained everything to her when she inquired about it. "What will happen to the baby if I leave her now?" I inquired. She scowled as she examined my case. "Due to your marriage, you are legally presumed to be the father, unless you go to court to contest paternity. Even though it's not biologically yours, you might still be responsible for child support if you don't challenge it quickly." It was in her office that I nearly puked. Emma had almost put me in a lifelong trap. What if I can show that she was dishonest? Vanessa tapped the desk with her pen. "That makes all the difference. You won't be held financially liable if we can demonstrate that she purposefully misled you. However, we require concrete evidence. The documentation from the fertility clinic is helpful. Ideally, though, she must confess it in writing or on record. And now they are moved by our assets. She can argue for half of everything if she files first. Although I had a lot to think about, there was still something about Emma's story that bothered me. The anonymous donor whose genes are flawless. It appeared to be convenient. Too easy. "Can we subpoena the clinic's actual donor records?" I inquired. Vanessa gave a nod. "We could try. They will argue that it violates their privacy, but considering the situation, we may have a chance." "What are you contemplating?" "I believe my wife is still deceiving me." I began to pull myself together over the course of the following few days. I started by taking the majority of our money out of our joint accounts, leaving just enough so she wouldn't realize it was gone right away. It was probably not the most moral thing to do, but I wasn't feeling very moral at the time. I transferred all of my vital records, including my passport, birth certificate, and car deed, to Mark's place. I even called the credit card companies to freeze any new charges on our shared cards. Emma kept calling and texting stuff like, "Please come home and we need to talk about this. And I still love you." I ignored most of it, just sent one text saying I needed space. Meanwhile, Vanessa was working on getting access to the donor records. The clinic was fighting it, claiming patient confidentiality, but the judge was sympathetic to my situation. Apparently, fraud will do that on day 5 of staying at Mark's. I finally agreed to meet Emma at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. Public place where I wouldn't lose my cool. I got there early and picked a table in the corner. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked terrible. She sat down across from me, hands immediately reaching for mine across the table. I pulled back. Jack, please, she started. I know I messed up. I know you're angry, but we can fix this. Fix what exactly? I inquired. The fact that you lied to me for months. The fact that you decided my genetics weren't good enough for our child. She flinched. That's not what it was about. I just wanted the best for our baby. Yeah, you said that. But this anonymous donor story is not even true. Her eyes darted away for a split second. Bingo. Of course it's true, she said, but her voice had that slight quiver that I knew meant she was lying. I leaned forward. Who is it really, Emma? Because I'm going to find out one way or another. That meeting at the coffee shop didn't go anywhere. Emma stuck to her anonymous donor story despite me catching her in the lie. We ended up leaving with nothing resolved, except me feeling even more certain she was hiding something big. I went back to Mark's place, where Thor was living his best life, getting spoiled by Jen, who kept sneaking him treats when she thought I wasn't looking. At least someone was happy in this whole mess. For the next week, I was basically living two lives. During the day, I'd go to work, pretend everything was normal when coworkers asked about Emma and the baby. Then I'd had 2 meetings with Vanessa, or spend hours documenting everything I could about our finances and the IVF situation. I even drove back to the house one day when I knew Emma would be at her prenatal appointment. Felt uncomfortable using my own key to sneak into my own home, but I wanted to get extra clothing and check if there was anything else I should take. That's when I found Emma's laptop. She always kept it password protected, but I knew her passwords. She used the same 3 for everything and had me write them down once when she forgot them. Classic Emma maneuver. Being covert yet also chaotic. I paused for approximately 2 seconds before logging in. Normally, I'd never look through someone's private belongings, but normal flew out the window when she chose to lie about our kid's paternity. At first, I didn't find much. Just work emails, Amazon orders, pregnant forums. Then I examined her email trash folder. I uncovered deleted communications between Emma and her buddy Olivia from the clinic stretching back almost a year. They were arranging the whole affair, Olivia informing Emma when she'd be working so she could manage the papers. Emma asked if it was truly feasible to use a new donor without my knowing out, but the actual thing was an email conversation with someone named Ryan. The topic line was changed. Are you certain about this? As soon as I opened it and began reading, my stomach dropped. She used to occasionally bring up Ryan Matthews, her college boyfriend, who she dated for 4 years prior to me, while discussing her past. She would periodically check his Facebook profile to see what he was up to. At first, the emails were cordial, getting caught up. For that type of stuff, how is life going? Emma went on to explain about our infertility issues and how she had been thinking about him a lot lately. She also noted how they had always discussed starting a family together when they were in college. Then my stomach turned as I noticed the sentence. I informed him that she was utilizing his sperm from his years-old donation to the clinic. He had apparently been a frequent contributor for additional money while in medical school. His answer? Astonishment, but not rage. He was okay with it and asked if I knew. Emma told him right away. Jack doesn't have to be aware. His ignorance won't harm him. I used my phone to take photographs of everything. Some of the images were grainy because my hands were trembling so much. I purged her trash once again after deleting the forwarded emails from her sent folder and forwarding important emails to my own account. I thought I was going to puke up the entire time. It wasn't simply a donation of flawless genes. Her ex-boyfriend was the one. It was his kid, not mine, that she desired. After I shut off the laptop, I must have sat there for 20 minutes, just looking at the wall. Now everything made clear. The falsehoods, the concealment, why she was so determined to manage every IVF appointment on her own. I emailed everything to Vanessa when I returned to Mark's house. She gave me a call practically quickly. Everything changes because of this, she remarked. This demonstrates intentional dishonesty and premeditation. This is going to be a field day for the judge. What should we do next? I inquired. Despite the bustle, I feel strangely at ease. As we continue to collect proof, we come upon this Ryan man. He was easy to locate. A physical therapist named Ryan Matthews works at a facility around 30 minutes away from our home. I instantly recognized him from photos Emma had given me years ago when I searched him up online. Tall and athletic, the sort of person who is most likely a college athlete, the type of man who gives sperm because tall Tall, athletic donors are paid more by clinics. I used a fictitious name to schedule an appointment. It's probably not the most moral thing to do, but I no longer prioritized ethics. His expression as I entered his treatment room, rather than the Mark Johnson he had anticipated, priceless. Shock, then acknowledgement. Then there was something that resembled remorse. "Jack," he said, motionless. "Why are you here?" I shut the door after myself. "I believe you understand why I'm here." He did not attempt to dispute anything. To his credit, he simply sat down hard on his seat and combed his hair. "You consented to it," she informed me. "At last," he said that you two had discussed utilizing me as a donor and that you were okay with it. "And you think that? That my wife's ex-boyfriend's child would be okay to me?" He looked back and winced. "No, it's not logical. Emma, however, is persuasive," I mumbled. "Tell me about it." "To be fair, I was unaware that she was deceiving you. If I had known, I wouldn't have consented." It didn't really matter whether or not I believed him. The harm was already done. "What comes next?" he inquired. "Will you strike me with a punch or something?" It nearly made me chuckle. "She lied to me, and I wanted to test whether you would do the same." I started to walk away, then paused. "Another stuff. Before or after we began trying for a child, did you two get back in touch?" "Before." He appeared perplexed. "She must have contacted me 3 years ago. Stated that she wanted to have coffee while she was in town. Since then, we've communicated intermittently." 3 years? We were planning our family the entire time. She was setting the stage for this. I felt as though the final jigsaw piece had finally come together. As I nodded and left, I spent hours driving about in an attempt to take it all in. I had underestimated the extent of the treachery. Emma wasn't the only one who made a poor genetic choice. While she was married to me, Emma had been preparing for years to have her ex's child. Around midnight, I eventually made my way back to Mark's house. Thor was waiting outside the door, but he and Jen had already fallen asleep, as if he was aware that I needed companionship. As I tried to think of what to do next, I picked him up and just sat on the guest bed, petting him. I called Vanessa the following morning and informed her of my chat with Ryan. She declared, "This is gold. However, we require more. Can you persuade Emma to write down any of this? Text messages? Emails? Anything?" I am not proud of what I did. I texted Emma to let her know that I wanted to talk things out, and that I could be overreacting to the anonymous donor situation. I told her that if she would just be honest with me, I would listen. She answered right away. I was clearly relieved that I was changing. We decided to get together that night at our place. I spoke with Vanessa one last time before heading over. We discussed the strategy for safeguarding my future and possessions. The divorce papers were already ready. Only need my last approval. Emma had obviously gone out of her way to make the house seem pleasant when I arrived. It was immaculate. She'd cooked my favorite supper, placed flowers on the table as well, as if this were a small argument we were trying to resolve. When I went in, she hurried to give me a hug and exclaimed, "Jack." I did not return her hug, but I did allow her. "You've been much missed. We must speak." She pointed to the dining table, but I said, not sitting down. She had stated, "Naturally. Quickly, she said, "I want to go into detail." "Excellent, since I have inquiries," I remarked as I took out my phone and pressed the record button. I began to record. "Tell me about this donor once more, please." The unnamed person wearing the ideal pair of jeans. She began by repeating her previous tale about wanting the best genetic profile and choosing our future kid out of love. "And there's no other reason you chose this particular donor," I remarked after letting her finish. She paused for only a moment. "What are you saying? I mean, is there anything else about him that particularly appealed to you?" One more pause. "Only the health profile, please. It isn't related to the fact that it's Ryan Matthews," since I nodded slowly. Her face was devoid of color. "What?" "Emma, I saw the emails. I spoke with Ryan. I am fully informed." She broke down in tears. Then, those dramatic, large tears that used to make me want to make things right. They simply infuriated me now. "It isn't what you believe," she cried. "Really? Because I believe you specifically selected the sperm from your ex-boyfriend. Had Olivia, your buddy, circumvent clinic procedures, intended to allow me to raise a child for another guy, while lying to me for months without ever telling me the truth. Did it not happen that way?" She kept sobbing while apologizing and claiming that she never intended to upset me, how our family may still exist. I switched off the recording. I had what I required. I'm going to file for divorce. My voice was fairly steady as I spoke. Most of my belongings have already been hauled away. The house is in my name, and I'll be selling it, but you may keep the furniture. That is not possible, she remarked, appearing abruptly alarmed. I'm expecting a child. What am I meant to do? It seems like you and Ryan will have to work through that issue. He has no desire to interact with the infant. She almost let out a scream. He recently gave sperm. He isn't prepared to have children. It nearly made me chuckle. Well, I'm not either. Not to this child, anyhow. Thor decided to let up. A loud meow from his carrier at the entrance at that same time. I had taken him to get his remaining belongings. She cried and screamed, "Please, Jack. I adore you, even though I know I made a huge mistake. This is something we can resolve." I looked over at her. Look at her, really. As her spouse, perhaps for the final time. Emma, no. You're not in love with me. You adore the steadiness I offer. A father, a home for your child. You wouldn't have done this if you loved me. I grabbed Thor's carrier and made my way to the door. My attorney will get in touch with you regarding the divorce process, I said without turning around. Don't give me another call. I experienced a strange range of feelings as I made my way to my car. Anger, of course, certainly hurt, but also relieved, as if I had finally snubbed the anchor that had been holding me back. Get me out of his container once more. I understand, friend. Let's go home, I told him. Our actual house. I emailed Vanessa the recording that evening. She responded to her text almost instantly. Excellent, she acknowledged. Enough. Tomorrow, we proceed. The next weeks were filled with preparation, paperwork, and legal meetings. In order to formally prove that I wasn't Emma's baby's father, Vanessa filed for divorce and a petition. Emma, meantime, was bombarding my phone with texts that ranged from furious accusations to frantic apologies. Just when I need you the most, you're leaving me, and I'm shocked at how vicious you are. And my own fave. In all that counts, it's still your baby. After that, I blocked her number. While I searched for a new place to live, Mark and Jen allowed me to stay with them. I located a respectable apartment near my place of employment that also permitted cats. Dealing with friends and relatives who were unaware of the full story was the most difficult aspect. Apparently, Emma had been telling others that I had abandoned her throughout her pregnancy due to some sort of mental breakdown. I discovered who my true friends were when some people truly believed her. As soon as I told my parents what had happened, they firmly supported me. When I informed my mother that she would not be receiving the grandchild that we had all been hoping for, she broke down in tears. "You're doing the right thing, son," my father remarked, placing his hand on my shoulder. When the court date eventually arrived, Vanessa produced the taped conversation, the emails, the messages, and the clinic's evidence on protocol breaches. She even had Ryan's statement attesting to Emma's deception of him about my knowledge and agreement. The judge would just glance at the evidence folder and raise an eyebrow whenever Emma's attorney attempted to make me the bad guy for leaving my pregnant wife. Additionally, the court put up Emma's hand each time her attorney attempted to intervene. The degree of dishonesty in this courtroom is unprecedented, even though I've witnessed a lot. The verdict was rendered precisely as Vanessa had anticipated. The divorce was approved. The child was not legally my responsibility. Furthermore, Emma received nothing from our joint assets. Because there was enough documentation of the scam, Mr. Wilson is still the sole owner as assets in light of the fraud proof. The judge declared that Miss S. Wilson would not be compensated financially as a result of this divorce. The court also acknowledges Mr. Wilson's right to withdraw any paternal claims to the kid because he is not the child's biological father. He will not be required to pay child support. Given Emma's precarious position as an unborn mother, her attorney made a final effort to request consideration. The court quickly put an end to that. Miss S. Wilson willfully changed medical treatments without her husband's approval, fabricated financial documents, and knowingly lied to him. No further compensation will be granted. The gavel was tapped once. The case is over. Emma simply sat still. Without a word, her lawyer shut his briefcase. I got up. A button. I put on my suit jacket and left without turning around. I inhaled deeply for the first time in months outside the courthouse. At last, it was over. It has already been 6 months since then, but I'm still in my flat. I'm considering purchasing a modest home with a yard where Thor may see birds. By the way, he's doing fantastically. As I try to compose this, I'm now dozing off on the keyboard. To avoid the turmoil, I temporarily removed myself from all social media. When I returned to the internet, I learned that Emma had returned to live with her parents in her hometown. Last month, the baby was born. Mutual friends who continue to speak with her describe him as a boy. I make an effort not to consider it. In retrospect, I'm still in awe at how someone I thought I know well could suddenly become a complete stranger. The Emma who did this to me and the Emma I married. They couldn't be the same individual, can they? However, they are. And it wasn't until it was nearly too late that I realized it. I suppose the lesson here is that you can never truly know someone. People may still surprise you in the worst ways, even after years of dating. You're stronger than you realize, though. I believed that my life was over 6 months ago. I'm doing okay now. Not very good, but not bad either. Just all right. And sometimes okay is sufficient. The last update. Reddit. It's Jack once more. I had no intention of updating, but I must relay some weird things that happened over the weekend. Someone starts beating on my door as I'm relaxing at home, watching the game with Thor. When I open it, I see Emma holding the infant while standing with her parents and brother Mike. Before I can stop them, they force their way into my residence. Emma's mother gets started right away. You need to take charge of your youngster now. I resemble my son. That's not my child, as we both know. Remember how this was the subject of a whole court case? DNA proof. Your ex-boyfriend Ryan Matthews, whose sperm you used. Mike interrupts me by claiming that 3 months ago, Ryan left town, abandoned his work, and completely disappeared from Emma. Social media was deleted. Child support is not being paid by him. I say that's terrible for her, but it's not my concern. Emma bursts into tears. The fussy infant is being bounced. Jack, I did make a terrible mistake. Her father interrupts with some bullshit about how we were married when the child was created. Thus, in God's view, I am still accountable for him. Emma had the audacity to exclaim, "Look at him, Jack. You could have him. We aren't really certain. We are certain that a paternity test was performed. Your court filings contained it." Her mother, "Those tests may not be accurate. Examine his eyes. They resemble you exactly. It's unbelievable how daring these folks are to attempt and gaslight me." When I instructed them to go, Mike pushed me and said, "You're just going to leave your wife and child behind? She is not my spouse. It's not my child either. And I'll call the police if you touch me once more." Emma, crying uncontrollably. "Jack, please. I'm not able to accomplish this alone. I had to resign from my work, but my parents are assisting. For a little moment, we are barely surviving. I nearly feel sorry for myself. Nearly. Then I recall the months of deceit and lying. Mike attempts to approach me once again, but his father stops him. "This is something you'll regret," Mike says. "We are aware of your workplace. Your parents' address is known to us." I take out my phone and begin filming at that point. "Do you mean to threaten me? Do you want to go quietly, or should I contact the cops right away?" When they eventually departed, Emma's father turned around and remarked, "This isn't what a real man would do." I simply give a head shake. An authentic guy refuses to be controlled. Vanessa was approached by Emma's family the next day in an attempt to reopen the case. She reminded them about the definitive paternity test and instantly shut it down. In addition, I set up surveillance cameras around my home and recorded the altercation. Mike's warning to find out where I work was particularly worrisome in case they do something else. I so informed my manager of the circumstance. Since that day, Thor has been particularly needy. This animal has made me more grateful than ever. Edit. I appreciate your help. Yes, I reported the threats to the police. No, I'm not sorry for Emma. I'm sorry for the child. However, I'm not accountable just because I feel horrible.